All right, Alex. That is really a great arrangement. Just real lively and fun and ferocious in places. I'm going to have a lot to say about it, but I kind of want to start off this evaluation by talking about a phenomenon that I'm seeing in some scores, and I'm wondering if this is a Dorico thing. I've gotten one or two entries from Dorico users where they left in like an empty staff at the beginning, and I was wondering, well, why are they doing that? And now I'm listening to this one, and if this is Dorico, then that would possibly be the reason. I'm seeing what looks like the Bravura font and so on, and so I'm assuming that this is Dorico, and that is that the grace note is being cut off. And I'm also seeing in Dorico entries that the music just starts right on the downbeat. There's no empty sound leading up to the mock-up. It just starts right bam on the downbeat. So if it's starting bam on the downbeat, then it'll cut off the little grace notes or any kind of flam that is happening in your percussion. So Dorico users, Dorico developers out there, work on that a little bit. Leave a little bit of dead space before the beginning of a mock-up. I just would think that that would be a basic thing, especially, this really shows immediately. If that is the situation with Dorico, then just watch out for that. Now, I am the last person in the world who would be starting a Sibelius versus Dorico kind of thing, because I really respect Daniel Spreadbury, and I was one of his biggest supporters back during when Dorico was first being developed. But just the time frame for me to be a beta tester at the beginning was just not at the optimum point. I did not have time to learn the application without a fully developed manual, which they didn't quite have yet. So kind of missed the time slot in my career for that. But maybe I will be getting into it a little bit more starting next year. So, but I'll definitely try to run that, and possibly also a version of Finale, so I can view scores and reformat them in those applications so that they're easier to view on screen for me. Okay, so now let's talk about your entry here. Alex, sorry about that boring intro. And we're starting off with a big, full sounding kind of a score, and what's kind of cool is you're starting off kind of playing by the rules to a degree of what Falla has laid down there, with a little bit, adding a few pitches below. We've got the bass clarinet kind of hammering away right in here, and then we've also got the timpani at the bottom down there. So you're stretching out the sound picture a little bit, right? So we're not totally stuck right where the original piano score was. So that is fulfilling one of our criteria, and then of course throwing in these big notes at the bottom, right? And that leads us to the next criteria: is thematic material sounding possibly too repetitive if it's basically copy pasted. And here you get around that by having these, just something as simple as adding a low note, boom, dun 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 dun, boom, dun dun dun. I would say probably, like, if there's more that you can do to make this a little fuller as well, to differentiate, like maybe throwing in some brass would be great. Now, the beginning of your score needs a little bit of work, right? First you tell me flute, and then you tell me A2, right? Which is it? Is it a flute player, or is it two flute players? Right, so right here at the beginning we need to say two flutes, one piccolo, or you don't have to put the number one. Two oboes, obviously, and usually there's just one English horn. Here you're saying one clarinetist, and then I'm seeing the second clarinetist, so there should be two clarinets in B flat, and so on. So this was in my template that I really did, kind of write out like how the score should look. And then here you're saying horn in F1 and horn in F2, but you're giving me 4 horns and 3 trombones, all on one staff. So I just think like the beginning of the score could be a little clearer. Now let's discuss the orchestration of that a little bit. We've got flutes basically doubled by piccolos the octave above. That's all great, and then you get to here, and it's just like flute and clarinet doing the rest of the melody. Really a lot of weight on this B, and that's perfectly fine. And then you've got the weight on the B below it with English horn and oboe. And then here you got bass clarinet playing the B right down there, like up a fifth from the timpani and so on. So, yeah, I mean, it's all fine. Then it's pretty much basically the same thing here, with just like the occasional low E. And then the strings just playing pizzicato throughout, right? And I had a discussion with an earlier entry about not the risks, but just the general outcome of going on for too long with pizzicato, and you really don't, but just being aware, fortissimo, pizzicato, lots of eighth notes, it's the kind of thing where like you don't want to go over that over and over and over to finesse it. Like it's it would probably get if there were a passage like this that needed to be rehearsed a lot. And you had some complex stuff going on, which you kind of don't, but like let's say that you did in other instruments that really needed to be woodshedded, then if the conductor was being considerate, he would just have those other players play and just give the pizzicato a rest, because it does really use up the fingertip. So is this arco or pizzicato? So I'm assuming like you have this arco note, and it's like you might, with everybody else being pizzicato, you might even want to put in little parentheses arco, right? But I mean, it's kind of clear from the fact you don't really need to do that, because it's sort of clear from the fact that you have got the grace note. But then somebody might be thinking, oh well, maybe this guy doesn't realize that slurring a grace note in pizzicato is like an effect that's not that strong. So, anyways, so I'm just saying, a little bit of insurance for the copyist, right? You just throw that in, and then of course it's up to the copyist whether or not they would put that into the part. But just making it clearer in context with the entire score. Okay, so the only big problem right in here is that the harp really can't compete with the pizzicato. Like it's playing more or less the same pitches as the strings, and fortissimo pizzicato on strings is going to bury forte plucking on harp. It would bury fortissimo plucking on harp. It would bury pretty much any kind of plucking on harp over the same exact pitches. So, it's a fun thing for the harpist to do, but it really isn't contributing anything to the sound at all. If you want some kind of meaningful doubling in here, I would say like throw in like maybe staccato English horn and oboe to cover some of those same available pitches, right? Just have them go boop 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 boop, that kind of punchy background kind of thing, and that'll bring more color into this than the harp ever will, right? Timpani and tambourine, that's all fine. Okay, and then here we got the bassoon doubling the cellos. That makes perfect sense. And the same exact thing again. Now here, like this actually has more of a chance of being heard than this. Way, way more. This big roll. But it should be marked fortissimo, if not triple forte, right? I mean, think the harp is the softest instrument in the orchestra next to the celesta, right? And so it really is. It's so hard to hear it unless it has some elbow room. So what are the things that a harp can do during a big fortissimo passage that will be heard? Well, obviously the glissando, and like little figuration above the sound. If they're, if the loud passage is not too loud, then you can hear the harpist playing above. Or a roll, right? A big rolled chord, and like the bigger the better, right? Like change this to a grand staff, and then have it roll from bass clef up to treble clef and over the top, a three-handed roll. Now here you're saying non-arpeggiando, and that is guaranteeing that the harp will disappear into the texture and nobody will be able to hear it. Right? So the more arpeggiando that there is, the more likely you'll hear the harp in a big loud passage. You tell them non-arpeggiando, they disappear. Because everybody else is just too powerful, right? And same exact comments here. You've got these pitches doubled by pizzicato strings, and there just isn't. Even if the harp was playing other notes besides these notes, harmonizing or playing over and so on, they just would still disappear with everything else that is going on. One horn playing forte is enough to just get rid of the harp completely. Now, if it is one horn player and one harp player, and they're playing a duo together, that's different. In fact, I've even heard there is a trombonist here who wrote a ton of music for harp and trombone, and he's performed it with another harpist I'm working with now on my harp concerto. And they had this duo, and they played all these different things. Some of them were arrangements of other pieces. Some of them were his own compositions, and he would play standard trombone and alto trombone, and the combination with the harp was great. So it's not to say, excuse me, that harp and brass cannot play together, but in a tutti, the brass will immediately just obliterate the harp, right? Okay, so in terms of the next concern, which is the melodic development soaring quite high, you've solved all that problem. You've got clarinet and piccolo working together, and that will be quite pungent, right? It's not quite as pungent as having E-flat clarinet and regular clarinet playing octaves together, but there still is that sense of incisiveness. A real kind of a cutting sound. And since there's a lot of acoustic space in this arrangement, it's perfectly fine for the piccolo to start off on B, which is, it's a weaker note for it. And the clarinet will be stronger until you start getting up towards the top of the staff, and then the piccolo starts to come into its own. And then it really starts to come into its own when it starts to get up into the ledger lines. All right, and then here you're starting off with clarinet, like, this is kind of strange. You've got first, and then you've got second, and then you've got A2, and then you've got first. How about just A2, first, A2, first, right? That is the role. That's the role of the first clarinet player. The second clarinet player's role is to support the first, right? And then like work on their real estate license. If they're in like a community orchestra, right? Like give your piece a better chance of getting the best possible result, no matter what orchestra plays it, by giving the right role to the right person, right? So I would say A2 here. There's no need for you to be just a single clarinet and a second, and then two clarinets on the next part. Both clarinets, first clarinet, both clarinets, first clarinet. Okay, and then right in here, oboe, piccolo, and then flute is like this is addressing the whole problem of the melodic development soaring quite high, and you do that really, really nicely. I like this. I like the little you're throwing in this contrapuntal line, contrary motion right in there, and you're supporting it with the violas, and then of course bass clarinet, second clarinet, and so on. And then you also have just repeating the D, written D right in there, sounding G. That is all really, really cool. Once again, there are a lot of really neat features to this, and that strengthen the music in my opinion. Okay, and it's also very wise to jump like to not have that contrapuntal motion lead to the next phrase, but to sort of end on different notes and then start the next phrase on the second beat. Okay, and then we've got this. Yeah, so I mean, what if this were E octaves, right? And without that middle note. And what if the middle note here and the middle note here were being played in octaves by the second, right? And then what if right here you had this C right in here, and then this E below it being played in sixths? Now all of a sudden, everybody is just as strong, even stronger, because you don't have to divide things up, and they're playing much, much better placed double stops rather than having to go divisi, right? This you would have to go divisi in 3, the way that you've written it. Now I'm showing you a way that you can get away with having it non-divisi. You know, you can have double stop E octaves, double stop walking down here an octave, C, B, B flat, and then an E sixth taking that E from the second violins, and you have all those pitches, right? And they're going to need that kind of force if you are going to have them playing against fortissimo winds and forte brass. You know, this big kind of chorale scoring. You bringing in trombones right in here, playing nice and strong on those pitches, and the horns as well. So the overtones from the horns are going to blot out what's going on in the strings if the strings are not more powerful and direct, right? And so that's another way of bulking that up. Now the best way to bulk it up, of course, would be to add more winds to it. But I understand what you're trying to do here is to have kind of winds and strings kind of a sound with a little bit of lower, you're wanting to have brass and strings kind of a sound here with a little bit of lower winds thrown in there, just to kind of stabilize things. And then a tiny bit of support from your oboes. So that all works pretty good. And then you've got your dia-da-da-dum with the with your strings. Bum 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 bum. And right in here, just the whole problem of a big beefy half note with an accent on it, at the same time as the melody, it's slightly problematic. This is the point at which I would say, like, even though you want to keep the sound of the winds out of it to a degree, I would still be adding like at least one flute doubling above, and maybe the first oboe could be doubling the second violin part, or maybe clarinets could be doing that. And then you're leaving your oboe family to cover those other pitches and so on. And then here you're getting to our next section, and in my opinion, that concern about the upper middle register scoring, it's just completely irrelevant in my original evaluation criteria. Maintaining a driving staccato going onwards, that obviously is very effective right in here, and I like the roll in the timpani below. And that timpani roll, that's one of those things that sort of kind of starts me thinking about like whether or not the sound set is really doing you a service, because it just felt kind of sort of rattle trap, it just felt a little funky, sounded a little funky. All right, then we've got clarinet coming in here, supporting the violin and sort of leading to a more mixed texture. So that ticks the box of transitioning smoothly into the next passage. So that's really nicely done. Okay, so forte poco. Now, as I mentioned recently, that is more of an interpretation of how the pianist is bringing down the volume, right? So this could have also been mezzo forte. It's kind of hard for the it's hard for the average concert player to figure out what forte poco means. You know, is it like a little under forte between mezzo forte and forte? Is it softer than mezzo forte? Right. That's another notion about it. Is it poco of the forte? Right. That is how a lot of people who play Brahms, where Brahms used it a lot. That's how they interpret it, especially like, you know, violists and clarinet players and so on. People who play his later chamber works. All right, so we're going to this, and you know, we'll just kind of assume this is kind of a mezzo forte kind of a sound, and in that case, this is all balanced, right? This is really nice. You've got the staccato going on here. You've got just the bassoon. I would mark these staccato as well. The bassoon's kind of hitting some of those same points along with the clarinet. And then we've got the trumpet coming in, playing this really nice solo. All right, and then we've got, like, coming to an end here. We're coming to the whole point of going back to the evaluation criteria. Contrast of color, breadth of texture. You are addressing that to a degree. Differentiated roles in closely spaced melodies, overlapping accompaniment figures. Yeah, pretty much. Keeping high interjecting notes from sounding too glaringly repetitive. I would say in this case, adding harp, which is very hard to hear. You're not going to have a problem with that, but it's just the whole question of whether or not the harp is going to contribute. Like here's secco, right? You know, like having a really dry, just kind of beep, right? You know, is that in the character of the music though? Because that higher note is kind of being held by the pedal to, you know, it's sort of being extended. A lot of these, right? Okay. The only problem that I see right in here, so I was a little iffy on the differentiated roles and so on in overlapping accompaniment figures, highlighting inner voices and so on. I feel that there is just no need to split up the this little interjection so severely, right? You've got strong brass right in here, and you need the part to be very integrated and very emphatic right in here. And in fact, it even needs like some crescendo and diminuendo hairpins, right? You just really need it to kind of come out more. So I would say probably the best way to get from here to there, right, would be to have the violas come in as soon as they possibly can, and have both instruments continue on towards the end of the bar, and as they start to get into territory where the second violin and first violin can come in, just have them dovetail into it and have them continue on, and have there be a crescendo going into this bar and then coming out of that bar, right? And you know, both parts absolutely mark forte, not forte poco, right? Don't give them the notion that they have to be underplaying, because you've got forte accents right in here, right? I mean, you don't need the accents in that it's going to be big enough already, right? So you need to balance this out, because you're stomping on this little guy right in here. And then you know, right in here, da 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 ba da 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 dum. I like the English horn, right? That's kind of nice. I don't think there's a need for accents in the clarinet part at all, or in the bass clarinet part, or the regular clarinet part, or the bassoon. But this is kind of fun. I love this kind of sort of scrubbing motion right in here. And then here you got violas soli, but then the bass clarinet coming in. So why is the bass clarinet just coming in here? Right? Why doesn't the bass clarinet come in from the beginning? Right? You've got this E right in here, right? And then like you have decided to give this note to your bass clarinet player, but I mean, do they really need to play that note when the bassoonist is already covering it? Why can't the bass clarinet player and the violas work together and bring this melody out and once again have a crescendo mark in there so that like there's a absolutely clear phrase and it does not have to compete with the horns, which do not need an accent, right? And then here things are going to be dying down, so it's better to not start the trombones loud. Just start them, I would say have them mezzo forte because we're heading towards this softer place right in here. If your double basses are going to be mezzo forte and the harp is going to be mezzo forte, then the trombones need to be mezzo forte here, even if these other elements are starting loud and getting soft. Because otherwise they're just going to glare. They're going to just stomp right over this beautiful beginning of the texture. Okay, and then we get to this point. And then we've got our little triplets. Da-da-da-dum. And you know, once again, we just have da-da, 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 right? And you know, you're completing the E in this bassoon, but I'm just kind of not feeling a sense of diving down towards the E, right? I'm just not getting that da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. Now here is where I would say to make an exception with your dynamic mixing, right? And that is here, this harp absolutely needs to be forte, right? That has to be forte right in there. Because it is just not going to stand out against these lower string parts. And I mean, that doesn't, and not even mentioning timpani, which should not be sforzando. This should be mezzo piano, right? So I would say, or you could say, you know, mezzo forte and then diminuendo, and you know, you cannot have that same level of force if you're bringing in harp right in here in any meaningful way, right? But I mean, I like this. Yeah, bum 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 bum. Violas, you're being so generous to your violas, just really really sweet to them. You know, in of course the violins, right? And first flute combining together. And, you know, here's a situation where the softer this is, the more you're going to hear the harp and the flute, right? That it's just sort of right. I would actually say if you really are in love with this whole idea, right, of the flutes being in there, you're setting yourself a trap because the sound of this sounding middle C going to B is going to add these real warm this kind of really warm sound in there, you know, as will these middle strings in here, the violas, right, and just the sound of the second violins and themselves at mezzo forte will sort of push the sound of the flute aside. So it would be better to have, I would say, A2 flutes if you absolutely must have flutes there. And if you don't really care what you do, then this should be a clarinet doubling of like maybe one clarinet playing, combining with the second violins. It is just such a soft register for the flutes. It's just barely feasible, right? And with all the other things going on around it, right? We want to maintain differentiation between these inner voices, right? We don't want certain elements to overwhelm other elements, and you know, I love the idea of the viola being in here and being like right next to the second violins and everything. I mean, I think that that's a great idea. I just think that it's going to be hard on a single flute player right in there, you know. And then here you're ending with oboe anyways, and that's not the strongest way to end. So I would say like you could just drop this down to a single clarinet and you would get a much richer kind of a sound from your violins while also making them sound a little cooler. And that just takes us to this right in here where you've got your oboe doubling anyways, a warmer sound for the second violin. And you know, and that's the other real risk here is to have the oboe taking over for the, you know, the warm rich oboe taking over for the kind of weak flute. Nobody will really hear the flute doubling, and then they'll suddenly hear this really rich oboe doubling, and it'll be this kind of jarring contrast, right? So that's another strong reason for having either two flutes or the clarinet play it. Or, you know, you could even have your piccolo player change to third flute and then have three flutes on that, and that would probably be enough to balance it at mezzo forte. trading off with a single oboe. And it would also have a nice rich sound, really rich, cool sound. Then, you change over, you're sort of going through all of your instruments. So, I mean, I can see why you're not using the clarinet yet, right? Because you're bringing it in right in there. So, yeah, so just once again, have your piccolo player change to third flute, and then go A3 with your flutes there. So A2 flute written in the staff, and then the piccolo player on third flute, and then they have plenty of time after that to change back to piccolo. All right, and right here, like you probably noticed in the mock-up, we got to the point where the harp became very, very easy to hear, right? So if you're just giving this really important role to the harp, then you've got to balance out everything, especially these thumps here on the timpani, which is still going to be really loud and easy to hear, right? I mean, you would get the same sound just with pizzicato double bass, right? If this were at the soft enough so that it didn't interfere with the harp, right? So you could just turn this into bum bum, bum bum, right? And that would fill in the doubling on this. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this. I think that you're keeping your textural contours fresh just by changing the doubling on the melody. I think that that's cool, but there is probably more that you could have done in terms of varying some of the functions and so on, and spreading them out to other instruments, and trying to keep it from being too much of the same thing for too long. Yeah, and with that, I'll just say that everything else was really, really cool. Just like the way that the ideas generally were being scored was fantastic. And I'm just working on tweaks with you here, so please don't take any of this personal or feel like you're a failure as an orchestrator. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just sort of pointing out some things that could be strengthened and improved and everything else. I mean, I think that you did something really great here, and it's once again filled with ideas that I just would never have thought of on my own, and that is such a joy for me to see the breadth of imagination that all of these entries represent. And I kind of reached a milestone a little bit with this. This is my 20th Patreon entry, and the last one that I can possibly do today. I'm pretty sure that those people are going to come by very soon and start banging around upstairs and making noise, and I will have to stop recording. But I did record quite a few Patreon entries just by getting up early this morning and doing it, and that is also a nice way to get things done as a musician and a composer in general, is to get up really early in the morning when all the people who want to destroy the world are asleep, safely in their beds, and then just get working on your own devious little plan for domination of your own art or your own world of music. And definitely I'm seeing the signs of a lot of intriguing, integrated, imaginative scoring in a lot of these entries, and especially in this one. So I really appreciate it, Alex. It just was great to get a score from you. And, with this kind of wealth of imagination, it just makes me wonder how you will tackle the 2022 Orchestration Challenge entry or excerpt if you get a chance next year. So, so thank you so much for this entry, for your support on Patreon. It just means a lot to me that people are, like the toughest, like music is the toughest business. It's the toughest job in show business, and being a composer is the toughest subset of that job, right? And that people are able to support this channel and to keep it going as a resource for all composers out there. It just amazes me and makes me feel grateful every single day that I get up and do things like this. So thank you, Alex. Thanks everybody out there watching this on the channel. Even if you're not able to support on Patreon, it still matters a hell of a lot to me that you have subscribed to this channel and to my website, and that you are improving yourselves and that your craft is getting a little bit better every time that you are composing something new, and that you're working on it. And if I had the tiniest bit to do with you improving some element of your craft, then I feel honored. Thanks, everybody. And I will be back for more of these semi-brev evaluations very, very soon.